They say a mother knows best. Mine always believed I wasn't enough, and this time she made it official. The rain had been falling for hours, light at first, now steady. It pattered rhythmically against the window pane like a metronome set to nostalgia. I sat cross-legged on the floor of my Boston apartment, surrounded by court notes I hadn't looked at in months. The files smelled like old paper and spent ambition. My tea had gone cold forgotten on the arm of the couch. The only sound in the room aside from the rain was the occasional creak of floorboards above me, Gracie shifting in her sleep. She didn't know about the sabbatical. Not really. To her, I was just working from home for a while. 8-year-olds don't ask why your badge and gavel disappeared. She didn't need to know that the break had been strongly suggested by the board after I'd overstepped in a high-profile custody case. But that wasn't what kept me up tonight. It was her. Barbara. Even her name tasted like rust in my mouth. I leaned back against the couch and closed my eyes. The weight in my chest wasn't new. It was familiar, almost comforting in its predictability. Like the memory of overhearing her say to Aunt Gwen when I was 12, Rachel was born fragile. She just doesn't know it yet. She was always careful, always veiled, never outright cruel, just correct. When I got my JD, she said, "You'll make a lovely family lawyer, so nurturing." When I was appointed as a judge at 39, she said, "So young for such pressure." But I suppose they were desperate for diversity. She once corrected my grammar during a eulogy, but she never screamed. She didn't need to. She knew how to withhold approval so skillfully it felt like your own failure. I sifted through a pile of notes. I hadn't had the heart to throw away my ruling from the Delgado case, the McAvoy adoption transcripts. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe a reason. Maybe the version of myself that used to speak with authority. That's when I saw it. An envelope. Unfamiliar stationery but unmistakable handwriting. Thick ivory cardstock. My full name on the front in that cursive she used for checks and holiday cards. Rachel Elise Whitmore. I stared at it. It hadn't been there yesterday. Ethan must have grabbed the mail and left it on the counter. I'd probably shoved it in with the paperwork without even noticing. I opened it carefully, slowly. No return address. Just an embossed seal at the top. Peterson Family Mediation. Invitation to participate. You are cordially invited to attend a voluntary family mediation session regarding ongoing familial obligations and responsibilities, including, but not limited to, caretaking, guardianship, and inheritance concerns. No mention of who was initiating it. Just a date, a location, her signature. Barbara Peterson. Polite, civil, and utterly chilling. She always used too many words when she wanted to hide a knife. I reread the letter 3 times. My fingers tightened around the page. Family mediation. What ongoing responsibilities was this about the lake house? Or maybe Melanie. I stood too quickly and nearly tripped on Gracie's school bag. I caught myself against the table, heart pounding. Calm down. You're spiraling again. That was what Dr. Lin used to say. But something was wrong. I picked up my phone and scrolled to her number. She still had a landline. Of course she did. It rang 4 times before she answered. Hello? I tried to sound neutral. Hi. Mom, I got your letter. A pause. I could almost hear her smile. Oh, good. I wasn't sure if it had arrived yet. What exactly is this about? I told you. A family mediation. It's very standard these days. With everything that's happened, I think it's wise to formalize certain arrangements. I swallowed. What arrangements? There was another pause, just long enough to be unsettling. I'm just doing what's best for the children. My grip tightened. The children. What children? She exhaled gently, the way she always did when she thought I was being slow. Melanie's twins. She's left them in my care. I'm filing for temporary custody. My knees buckled slightly and I dropped onto the couch without grace. Melanie. We hadn't spoken in over a year. She was always disappearing, drifting between coasts, rehab centers, and sudden boyfriends. But she had never. Children, I didn't even know she. Wait, what do you mean she left them? Barbara's voice stayed calm. There's no need to get emotional. This is what's best. They need stability. I barely heard her after that. My mind had become a kaleidoscope of static and echoes. Melanie. Gone. 2 children twins left with Barbara. Left. And Barbara was filing for custody, which meant court, which meant she was about to build a case, which meant she would reach. I felt a tremor move through me, not fear. Something sharper. A page from my past life fluttered to the floor, Section 201 of the Family Protection Act, eligibility to file for guardianship. I had ruled on that exact clause dozens of times. Now it might be used against me. And the one woman who had never believed in me was going to testify that I wasn't fit to raise even my niece and nephew. All I could do was stare at the envelope again, reading the words like they might change. But they didn't. Barbara had started a war, and I was already a few moves behind. Every single view means a meal for someone in need. Just by watching this video, you're giving warmth, hope, and a full plate to those less fortunate. So watch now, share now, subscribe to the channel, and let's spread love together. I hadn't spoken to Melanie in 4 years. That morning, she called me crying and then disappeared. The sun was still low, barely slicing through the gray Boston sky when I pulled out of our driveway. Gracie sat in the back seat, legs swinging, humming some tune from a cartoon I'd half-watched with her the night before. The streets were wet from last night's rain, and the windshield wipers swept back and forth like a heartbeat trying to stay calm. The radio murmured softly, a morning host talking about the Red Sox game, but I barely registered it. I hadn't slept. After Barbara's call, I stayed up reading through every document I could find on family mediation law and temporary custody in Massachusetts. My old instincts had kicked in, case precedents, jurisdiction loopholes, the language of control wrapped in legal protocol. And yet, none of it prepared me for the voice that broke through the Bluetooth speaker as I turned onto Commonwealth Avenue. Rachel. The static buzzed at the edges, then a sob. Rach, it's me. I don't know what to do. I hit the brake too hard. Gracie lurched forward and looked up. Mom. Hang on, sweetie, I said quickly, turning the volume knob down but not off. Melanie, I could barely believe it. Where are you? I messed up. Her voice cracked. They said they'd take the babies. I didn't. Barbara said she'd help. She said she promised. You're not making sense. Who said they'd take them? There was more static than just sobs. I left them with her. Okay. She said she'd just watch them for a few days. I had to leave. I had to fix something. Rachel, please. You left Noah and Sophie with Barbara. Gracie's eyes were on me in the rearview mirror. Her humming had stopped. Rach. I didn't know what else to do. They were gonna. Her voice pitched into panic. Don't let her keep them. Promise me don't let her. The call dropped. I stared at the screen. Call ended. No number displayed. Blocked. Or maybe a burner. I tapped redial, but it went straight to voicemail. Gracie tugged on her seatbelt. Was that Aunt Mel? Yes, I said, trying to steady my voice. She's in trouble. I didn't tell her that I was trembling, or that I already knew this wasn't the end of it. It was the start. By the time I pulled up to Gracie's school, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a voicemail from an unfamiliar number. I played it on speaker as I parked. Hello, this is Allison Meyer with Child Protective Services. We're contacting you as next of kin regarding minors Noah and Sophie DeSantos, currently placed under temporary custodial care with Barbara Peterson. If you have questions or intend to petition for custody, please respond within 72 hours to confirm receipt. Thank you. Gracie leaned forward. Who are Noah and Sophie? They're your cousins. I said quietly, heart pounding. You'll meet them soon. She smiled. Cool. I forced a smile in return. Go on, baby. I'll see you this afternoon. Once she was inside, I didn't drive home. I went straight to Barbara's. Her house looked exactly as I remembered, meticulous, symmetrical, sterile. Every shrub trimmed like it feared being too much. The front porch had fresh hydrangeas, and the door had a tasteful seasonal wreath. I knocked once, then twice. The third time she opened it as if she'd been expecting me. Rachel. Her tone was neutral, but her eyes scanned me the way they always did, measuring something. I got your letter. And the voicemail from CPS. You want to tell me what's going on? She stepped aside. Would you like to come in? I hesitated, then followed. The inside of the house smelled like lemon polish and silence. No toys, no signs of children. Just the distant hum of classical music playing from the dining room speakers. Mozart, if I wasn't mistaken. I thought you were retired from judging, she said casually, gesturing toward the living room. I'm on sabbatical, I snapped. Temporary. She said. Still adrift then. I ignored the bait and looked around. Where are the twins? Asleep. They've had a very difficult few days. Melanie left without even a bottle packed. I blinked. You said she left them in your care. What happened? She panicked. You know how she is. I haven't seen how she is in years, thanks to you. She sat on the edge of the armchair, legs crossed, perfectly still. Rachel, you're not here to dig up old grievances. I did what was necessary. Melanie is unstable. You know that. And you think you're the stable one. I've never been to rehab. I've never abandoned my children. Because you made sure we never had the option to collapse, I snapped. You built cages and called them standards. She didn't flinch. You're emotional. You always were. I stepped forward. CPS called me. That means you didn't list me as next of kin. You're trying to take full custody without notifying me. You're hardly in a position to take them, she said coldly. You have no stability, Rachel. You can barely hold a job. I laughed once, bitter. I held judgment over hundreds of families. Don't pretend you know me. She stood slow and graceful. Then she reached into the drawer of a polished sideboard and pulled out an envelope. I'll see you at mediation on July 1st. Bring a lawyer. My fingers curled as she handed it to me. I didn't take it at first. I just stared at her, wondering what version of truth she planned to present in that polished courtroom. But I already knew. The version where I was the damaged one, where she was the savior. I finally took the envelope. The cardstock was the same as before, expensive, impersonal, meant to bruise politely. She smiled, tight, triumphant. You may want to start preparing. They always favor the stable grandparent. My throat burned. I wanted to scream, to cry, to remind her that I had been the youngest judge in state history, that I had balanced more lives than she ever touched. But I didn't. Instead, I left. And the envelope felt heavier than anything I'd ever ruled on. It wasn't the insults that hurt. It was seeing my entire career reduced to bullet points in my mother's affidavit. The kitchen smelled like ink and overwhelm. Legal pads were scattered across the table, pens, uncapped pages of discovery, and scanned documents fanned out like fallen leaves. Gracie's laughter echoed faintly from her room upstairs, something about a YouTube video and a plush dinosaur. I wanted to be present for her. Instead, I was dissecting the life I'd built as if it were an autopsy. Ethan stood by the fridge, scrolling through another string of emails I'd forwarded to him. His glasses slipped slightly down the bridge of his nose, and he pushed them up absent-mindedly as he read. We hadn't spoken much since dinner. Not because we were fighting, just because the weight between us didn't leave room for casual. I flagged the email from the mediation board, he said. They've accepted her affidavit into the formal hearing file. I nodded without looking up. My eyes were still glued to the page in front of me, Barbara's complaint. 4 typed pages, single-spaced, sterile, strategic. Each paragraph a scalpel slicing through my identity. Unstable employment record following judicial resignation. Documented emotional outbursts in both personal and professional settings. Lack of demonstrable co-parenting structure. Repeated signs of psychological burnout. I let out a slow breath. Unstable employment. It was a sabbatical. Ethan walked over and rested his hand lightly on my shoulder. To her, everything that isn't permanent looks broken. She's calling me emotionally reactive, I muttered. As if she wasn't the one who once threw a crystal vase across the kitchen because I forgot to send a thank you card. He gave me a look. You told me it shattered like glass rain. I was 12. The phone buzzed beside me. I put it on speaker. Rachel came, Nina Delgado's voice, crisp and professional as always. Just got off with the board's mediator. They've moved up the pre-hearing review. July 1st is firm. Of course it is, I said. I also reviewed Barbara's affidavit. Nina continued. She's not just building a custody case, she's implying judicial bias. She mentioned your ruling in the Hannigan case said it showed emotional projection. I shut my eyes for a second, biting back the urge to scream. The Hannigan case had been brutal, an abusive father, a terrified mother, a system that failed both. I'd made the right call, even if it hadn't pleased the press. She's weaponizing your empathy, Nina said. She knows exactly how to frame this for a board who values detachment. Ethan sat across from me now, his laptop open. She's not building a case to win custody. She's building a narrative. A myth. Barbara, the stable matriarch, versus Rachel, the fallen judge. She's trying to make me look like Melanie, I whispered. Silence. Then Nina said gently, you need to get ahead of this. Show documented proof of your capacity, employment history, parenting structure, even your therapy records if you're willing. My chest tightened. I've spent my whole life proving I'm not fragile. And now, Nina replied, you'll do it again. On paper. After we hung up, Ethan went back to combing through my emails for anything else useful. I sat with the affidavit for a long time, reading and rereading each line. Barbara had always been strategic with words like wrapping poison in velvet. But this wasn't just a criticism. This was an indictment. In the bottom of one file folder, I found something I hadn't looked at in years, an old family email chain. Dozens of threads between Barbara, Melanie, and me. Most were benign holiday logistics, family photos, forwarded recipes. But one buried in the middle caught my eye. Subject: concerns about Rachel. Date: March 12, 2019, from Barbara Peterson to Melanie DeSantos. Melanie, I know you want to rebuild a relationship with your sister, but you must be cautious. Rachel is under a great deal of stress, and I fear her sense of judgment is compromised. She may not be the safest influence right now for herself or for others. I urge you to keep some distance until she finds balance. I stared at the words, bile rising in my throat. She'd already been planting seeds even back then. I called Melanie 2 days after that email was sent. She never returned it. You okay? Ethan asked softly. I slid the laptop across the table to him. Read this. He did. Slowly. His mouth pulled tight. She was sabotaging you before this even began. Mom collects every mistake like she's building a case, I said quietly. Melanie warned me once. I thought back to the night I'd handed in my resignation letter. Barbara had come over with wine and frozen quiche. She didn't offer comfort, she just said, maybe now you can prioritize family. It's time. I thought she meant mine. She meant hers. I stood up, pacing the kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. My thoughts raced past court rulings, missed birthdays, Gracie's first day of school that Barbara had skipped because children don't remember anything before age 6. She'd always been calculating. I looked back at the affidavit. This wasn't about Noah and Sophie. This wasn't even about Melanie. She's not just after the kids, I whispered. She wants the legacy. My silence made it easy, and I'd been silent for far too long. The room smelled like lemon-scented surface wipes and judgment. I had barely stepped inside the mediation room before I felt my stomach twist. Everything was too clean, too engineered to feel neutral. Beige walls, a ticking clock that seemed louder than it should have been, and a faint hum of a white noise machine coming from behind the frosted glass divider near the caseworker's desk. It was designed for calm. Instead, it felt like a stage, and I was the reluctant understudy about to miss every cue. Barbara was already seated. Of course she was. She wore pale blue, something soft maternal meant to echo serenity, and her hands rested perfectly folded on the conference table. Her expression was warm, almost bashful, as if this wasn't a legal proceeding but an unfortunate family matter she hoped could be resolved with grace and patience. Richard Harlow sat to her left. Silver hair, steel eyes, and a briefcase that probably contained an entire decade's worth of quiet wins. He was the kind of lawyer who never raised his voice because he didn't have to. To my right, Nina Delgado scrolled silently through her tablet, her jaw tense. I could see the lines around her mouth clenched from the moment we entered. She didn't need to say, "I told you so." Her warning echoed clearly. Your mother doesn't just speak to people, she performs. Ms. Whitmore, said Tessa Lynn, the CPS caseworker, offering me a quick nod. Early 30s, efficient. Her tone was warm but neutral. Too neutral. Thank you for coming today. I offered a tight smile and sat. Barbara turned, slightly smiling just enough to appear genuine, and then softly began her statement. I just want what's best for the children, she said, voice trembling at the edges. Noah and Sophie have been through so much. Melanie, she wasn't well, and Rachel has always been so busy, so driven, so passionate. She looked at me with a kind of pity that made me want to throw the conference phone across the room. I've volunteered at St. John's Church for 18 years, Barbara continued. I run the preschool program on Tuesdays and help with the community pantry on Saturdays. My home is stable, structured. I keep routines, nutritious meals, and quiet evenings. The twins have adjusted beautifully. I felt my jaw tighten. Ms. Whitmore, Tessa asked, her pen poised. Would you like to respond? I swallowed. Yes. I stopped. Recalibrated. I'm grateful the children are safe, but what's being said here doesn't reflect the full story. Barbara leaned back, her expression the picture of benevolent disappointment. I was a family court judge for over a decade, I continued. I've made hundreds of decisions about custody and child safety. I understand what constitutes a stable environment, and Pardon me, Richard interjected, perfectly timed. We respect Ms. Whitmore's experience, of course. However, I feel it's relevant to note that she resigned from her judgeship under circumstances that suggested personal strain. That's not accurate, I snapped. Nina touched my hand under the table gently but firmly. Richard gave a small professional smile, only highlighting that the environment in question may need further evaluation, especially considering Ms. Whitmore's daughter Gracie is currently in therapy, correct? I froze. That's confidential. And irrelevant. Not irrelevant, Barbara murmured. You've always had so much to carry, Rachel. It's a heavy burden being a single parent, especially without consistent work or emotional regulation. My chest burned. She sees a child therapist, I said through clenched teeth. Because I believe in preventive care, not because she's unsafe. No one's saying she's unsafe. Barbara replied, soft as snow. We're saying, overwhelmed. Tessa scribbled something. I tried to read her face, nothing. A stone wall of bureaucratic empathy. I glanced at Nina. Her eyes said, breathe. Don't give them what they want. But it was too late. I could feel the flush in my cheeks, the way my voice got tight when I tried to stay calm. And what about Melanie? I said suddenly. Are we pretending she just vanished on her own, that she wasn't pushed there by years of Barbara's hand went gently to her pearls? I've always supported both my daughters, she said, eyes glistening. She's always been unstable under pressure, Barbara added after a pause. You can ask her former colleagues. My fingers dug into the underside of the table. She's playing the long game, Nina had told me. This isn't about winning custody. It's about rewriting the story. I stared straight at Tessa now. She's right, I said evenly. Ask them. Ask anyone. Ask the people I worked with, the families I advocated for. But also, look at who's been controlling the narrative all this time. There was silence broken only by the hum of the white noise machine. Then Tessa cleared her throat. Ms. Whitmore, may I schedule a home visit next week? I'd like to see how you and Gracie live. Nina didn't react, but I could feel the message vibrating between us. Stop defending. Start documenting. She smiled when I said I was done with her. Then she said, You'll never be done, Rachel. Not with me. The air in Barbara's garden was unnaturally still. Even the wind seemed to respect her boundaries, rustling the manicured hedges without daring to ruffle her perfect linen blouse. The roses were in bloom, crimson and prim, each thorn trimmed as if the thorns themselves had been warned to behave. It was the kind of space you'd find in a lifestyle magazine. Serenity, curated, reality, erased. I stood in the middle of it, my fingers clenched at my sides. You didn't need to come here, she said, sipping tea from a porcelain cup that had outlived 3 family dogs and at least 2 marriages. We'll resolve everything soon enough in a professional setting. I ignored the jab. I wanted to speak privately, I said. For the kids. For Melanie. Her eyes flicked toward the roses. Melanie made her choices. And you never gave her the space to heal from them. Barbara placed the teacup down with surgical precision. You assume so much. It must be exhausting constructing an entire mythology where you're the misunderstood hero. I sat down across from her at the wrought iron table. The cushions were perfectly aligned, embroidered with gardenias. I wanted to rip one apart just to see what was inside. I'm not here to be a hero, I said. I'm here to beg if I have to, that we don't do this in court. You've already hurt Melanie. You're about to drag 2 more children through another generation of damage. Let it stop here. Barbara's face softened just a fraction. But her voice? It didn't waver. I'm not dragging anyone, Rachel. I'm providing stability. Something neither of you ever managed. You mean control. Control is what keeps children safe. No, I said quietly. Love is. Her mouth twitched. Not a smile. Not quite. That's rich coming from the woman who missed Gracie's first school play because she was too tired to be seen in public. I swallowed hard. She was referring to the month after I resigned. The depression I never admitted. The grief I hadn't named. But she remembered. She always remembered the bruises, never the beatings. I came here to reason with you, I said, my voice catching. I'm not unstable. I've built a home, a life. It's not perfect, but it's mine. Barbara stood and walked to the stone fountain at the far end of the garden. Her back was to me. Her words, however, were surgical. You're not fit, Rachel. Never have been. And now everyone will see it. My throat closed. She turned face unreadable. I've spoken with the Fairbanks, the Harlows, even Aunt Louisa. They've all agreed to testify. They remember the tantrums, the sensitivity. They always worried. I stood. You mean they believed what you told them? She didn't respond. I could feel my pulse in my palms. A distant version of myself would have stormed out by now, slammed the gate, cried in the car, replayed the conversation for hours. But not today. Today I stayed. You've been building this case for years, I said slowly, planting seeds, isolating me. Barbara smiled serene. I was preparing for the inevitable. A bird chirped somewhere behind me. It felt like mockery. I reached into my pocket and subtly tapped the voice memo app open on my phone. My thumb hovered just beneath the edge of the table. I didn't care if it was admissible. I needed something real, something I could play back when the gaslight got too strong. "Let me ask you something," I said, my voice steady now. "Why not just take in the kids and be done? Why the smear campaign?" She tilted her head. "Because people trust you? Or they used to. And I can't have that interfering." "With what?" "With saving them." Then she looked at me, really looked at me and said it. "I'm not taking them from you. I'm saving them from becoming you." I didn't move, didn't flinch. But the words sank into me like a dull knife, slow and irreversible. I waited until I got back to the car before breathing again, before letting the tears well and fall, before replaying the audio 3 times to make sure her voice was clear, crisp, calculated. Then I pulled up Nina's contact and hit send. The message was short. "Start the file. I'm done playing nice." Barbara wasn't raising children. She was performing sainthood with my niece and nephew as props. Her house smelled like lavender polish and lemon bars, a scent too deliberate, too orchestrated to be accidental. The front porch held a rocking chair with a seasonal cushion embroidered with the words, "Bless this home." Even the wind chimes were tasteful. No wild jingles, just soft metallic sighs that seemed timed to welcome Tessa Lynn, who stepped onto the porch with clipboard in hand and a polite but guarded expression. I walked a step behind her. Not a guest, not an intruder, just the shadow Barbara thought she had long erased. "Rachel," Barbara said smoothly, opening the door before we could knock. "And Ms. Lynn, please come in." The twins were in the sitting room dressed in matching pale blue outfits. Noah sat perfectly upright on a floral cushion, a wooden puzzle box in his lap. Sophie was coloring. Both looked up, smiled, and chirped hi in eerie synchronicity. Tessa smiled back. "Hi there. I'm Tessa." Barbara's hand grazed the top of Noah's head. "This is Noah." And Sophie's there with her crayons. "Would you like a snack, Ms. Lynn? I just made oatmeal raisin cookies. Organic." "I'm fine, thank you," Tessa said, but Barbara was already drifting toward the kitchen. I watched the children. Their smiles faded once Barbara turned her back. Tessa knelt down beside them. "Can I ask you some questions about your routines? Like bedtime?" Noah looked up, hesitating. We brush our teeth and then say prayers." Sophie added and read, "Good night, moon." I could feel it then, the too smooth rhythm of lines practiced, rehearsed. Tessa nodded slowly. "What time is bedtime?" Noah opened his mouth, then paused. Across the room, Barbara appeared in the kitchen doorway, smiling but not at Tessa. She was watching Noah, and with the faintest movement, 2 fingers tapping her wrist like a clock, she cued him. 7:30, he said quickly. Tessa blinked. "Great. That's very consistent." She turned to Sophie. "And who tucks you in?" Grandma, Sophie replied, glancing toward the kitchen, then back down at her drawing. "Every night." I didn't say a word. I just watched, observed, noted. Tessa stood walking through the hall while Barbara led her on the tour. She showed the kids' beds immaculate, toothbrushes lined up by color, a framed family rules poster in the hallway full of scripted kindness, "Love each other. Tell the truth. Be thankful." "You're welcome to check the pantry," Barbara said with a smile. "All low sugar, no red dyes. We follow a mindful diet here." I didn't miss the glance she gave me as she said it. We moved outside to the garden where Tessa admired the swing set. Barbara offered up a lemon water in a reusable glass bottle. She was careful, curated, constantly narrating. "They love being outside. Sophie paints the flowers sometimes. I keep the brushes right here." It was a performance. All of it. And she knew her audience. Before we left, Tessa paused at the foyer, tapping her notes. "This was very helpful." Barbara smiled like she'd already won the custody case. As they exchanged goodbyes, I stepped toward the coat rack where I had left my purse and subtly adjusted the flap of the small audio recorder I'd hidden earlier that morning. It had been nestled under a stack of Reader's Digests beside the entryway, close enough to hear anything worth keeping. Once outside, Tessa waited until we reached the sidewalk. She turned to me and whispered, "Something's too perfect. I'll file a secondary interview." I nodded. My voice caught, but I held it in. "Thank you." Back home, after putting Gracie to bed and locking the doors, I curled into the couch with the recorder. I pressed play. For a long stretch, there was nothing. Just the hum of a refrigerator, some quiet footsteps. Then Barbara's voice. Soft, gentle. The same tone she used when tucking in dolls, not daughters. If she asks about the pills again, she said, "Say it's vitamins." "Just vitamins." A long pause. Then Sophie's voice. "But they're not right. Just vitamins." Barbara repeated. Click. End of file. I stared into the dark room, the silence now louder than any words. This wasn't just a custody battle anymore. It was a war for the truth, and my mother had already rewritten most of it. But this time, I wasn't just watching. I was recording, documenting, building a case, and I was done pretending it wasn't real. Some truths arrive not with trumpets, but in silence, like when your opponent flinches for the first time. Nina Delgado pressed pause on the recorder. The room was still, her index finger hovering above the spacebar like she wasn't quite ready to let the moment go. We were seated in her office surrounded by bookshelves full of legal codes and family law precedents, but in that second, none of it mattered more than the 6 words playing in both our heads. "Yef, if she asks about the pills again, say it's vitamins." I'd listened to the clips so many times I knew the cadence by heart, the careful enunciation in Barbara's voice, the tremor in Sophie's. But hearing Nina react was different. Her silence felt like a verdict. This, she finally said, is witness tampering, not just manipulation. Coaching a minor to give false testimony, especially in a custody matter, is serious. "I know," I replied, though. My throat tightened. "That's why I brought it to you first." She leaned back, fingers steepled under her chin. "The question is, do we use it now or later?" I knew what she meant. Drop it now, and it disrupts Barbara's campaign of sainthood. But hold it until the formal hearing, and it hits like a controlled explosion, public, undeniable, and harder to spin. "I don't want to turn this into a media thing," I said. "I want to win because it's right, not because I outperformed her theatrics." Nina nodded slowly. "Then we escalate quietly." She typed out an encrypted email to Tessa Lynn attaching the audio file with a short summary potential coaching of minors, recommending second interview outside custodial setting, unscheduled, no parent present. By the time I left her office, the war room vibe was palpable. We had strategy. We had leverage. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was gasping for air. I was breathing with purpose. When I got home, Ethan was folding laundry. Gracie had fallen asleep on the couch, a soft blanket tucked around her and a worn-out stuffed flamingo pressed to her chest. "I met with Nina," I told him. He looked up, cautious. "Good news," I played the recording for him. When it ended, he exhaled. "She's cracking." "Not cracking," I corrected, showing her first fracture. My phone buzzed the next morning. An email from Tessa. Subject: follow-up message requesting second interview with Sophie. Unscheduled. No guardian present. Will coordinate with neutral third-party observer. Discretion preferred. My hands trembled. I could practically see Barbara's face when that request arrived. And sure enough, the call came 2 hours later. Barbara's voice was acidic. "You've been spying on me." I didn't answer. "You think this little stunt will make a difference?" she hissed. "You don't understand the system, Rachel. You never did." I remained silent, letting her flail against the void. She hung up before I could say a word. For once, I didn't have to defend myself. I didn't need to scream my truth into a vacuum. The facts were beginning to speak. Later that afternoon, Nina forwarded a reply from Tessa. Subject RE audio evidence message child showed signs of conflicting testimony. Requesting temporary hold on custody assignment. Case may require re-evaluation. I reread the line 3 times. Re-evaluation. For someone like Barbara, whose entire world thrived on perception doubt, was the first real wound. And we had drawn blood. But the system never let a victory breathe for long. That night, Richard Harlow filed a formal motion with the mediation board. The PDF appeared in Nina's inbox like a flare shot across our bow. Subject: motion to disqualify. Rachel Whitmore as guardian basis evidence of emotional instability, retaliatory behavior, and strategic psychological manipulation of minors. I stared at the screen. My own defense had become their weapon. He's painting me as unstable, I whispered. Ethan read over my shoulder. They're scared. I shook my head. No. They're pivoting. If they can't control the facts, they'll discredit the witness. The room felt smaller, the stakes sharper, but I didn't feel defeated. Not this time. Barbara had finally flinched, and now the gloves were off. Every single view means a meal for someone in need. Just by watching this video, you're giving warmth, hope, and a full plate to those less fortunate. So watch now, share now, subscribe to the channel, and let's spread love together. If the truth lives anywhere in my family, it's buried in dust, boxed in silence, or written by someone who gave up trying to explain. The attic smelled like old cedar and secrets. I ducked under a slanted beam flashlight, trembling slightly in my hand. Dust motes swirled in the narrow beam of light, floating like ghosts waiting to be acknowledged. This part of Barbara's house hadn't been touched in years. Even her compulsive cleanliness hadn't reached this far. Behind me, Ethan stepped cautiously, brushing aside cobwebs with the sleeve of his jacket. This is not where I thought we'd end up on a Saturday night, he muttered. I used to come up here as a kid, I said, before she started locking the door. I think she was always afraid we'd find the things she couldn't control. We moved past a stack of outdated Christmas decorations and boxes labeled tax records and church archives. Then I saw it, an old wooden trunk tucked behind a wardrobe missing its door. It was unlabeled except for one yellowing strip of masking tape on the lid, "Do not open, personal." I glanced at Ethan. He didn't say a word, just nodded once. The latch creaked as I opened it. Inside were a few leather-bound notebooks, edges curled with age. Beneath them, carefully sealed in a manila envelope, was a letter addressed in careful cursive. To the daughters I failed to protect. My heart stopped. It's his handwriting, I whispered. Ethan crouched beside me as I slid the letter out. My hands shook as I broke the seal. We sat on the wooden attic floor, knees bumping the silence so loud it pressed on my ears. Rachel Melanie. I don't know when or if you'll ever find this, but if you do, it means you went searching for answers your mother never gave you. I'm sorry for the things I let happen. I was a coward. Yes, your mother will hate that word, but it's true. I let her decide what was true, what was acceptable, and what could be erased. Rachel, you weren't unstable. She said you needed therapy because you cried too easily. She forged the reports. I saw them after she submitted them to the school board. I wanted to fight her. I didn't. Melanie, I know she blamed you for everything, for being too loud, too wild, too much. But I saw the bruises. You didn't fall down the stairs. You didn't break the vase. I should have spoken sooner. I should have protected you. But Barbara, she doesn't argue. She conquers. And I let her. I'm leaving these journals in case you want to know how much I hated the silence. I didn't choose it. I just stopped surviving the noise. The paper crinkled under my fingers. I couldn't speak. My throat felt like it was wrapped in barbed wire. Ethan took the page gently from my hand, finishing the last lines aloud. She never wanted daughters. She wanted legacies. I wiped at my cheeks and realized I was crying, not the furious, helpless kind, but the slow, grieving kind that comes from finally having a name for the ache you've carried too long. She destroyed him, I said, my voice hollow, piece by piece. And she's not done with us. Ethan didn't try to comfort me. He knew better. Some grief has to be sat with. We stayed up there for what felt like hours, reading through passages in the journals, small entries about arguments, regrets the way Barbara smiled at PTA meetings but tore into him behind closed doors. She forged reports I repeated more to myself than anyone. That explains the therapy, the diagnosis they hinted at when I was 15. I thought I was broken. I thought I'd imagined the distance between me and the rest of the world. She made you think that, Ethan said. On purpose. I wanted to scream, but instead I folded the letter and tucked it back into its envelope. This isn't evidence, I said finally. Not yet. Ethan looked at me confused. Then what is it? It's motive, I replied. And motive is powerful when exposed at the right time. He didn't argue. I stood legs stiff and brushed dust from my jeans. As I turned off the flashlight, the attic returned to darkness, but inside me a light had flickered on. I wasn't just fighting for custody anymore. I was fighting to reclaim the truth of who I had been before Barbara rewrote me into someone else. And next time we stood in that mediation room, I wouldn't be the woman Barbara painted in affidavits. I'd be the daughter who read the letter in the attic and decided to stop being silent. Sometimes, justice doesn't come from evidence. It comes from someone finally saying I was wrong. I could tell she was nervous the moment she walked in. Mrs. Lillian North clutched her handbag like it contained state secrets, and her heels tapped the linoleum floor with uneven rhythm. Her white blouse was pressed perfectly, and the brooch on her collar glinted under the fluorescent lights, a tiny angel with outstretched wings. She sat down across the table from me in the CPS Pretrial Interview Center's glass-walled room, not meeting my eyes. Through the frosted sections of the wall, I could see Nina already speaking with the CPS representative, likely laying the groundwork. I wasn't sure if I was meant to be here technically, this was a witness interview, but Nina had insisted I observe. She thought presence had weight. And for once, I sat in silence. Mrs. North finally looked at me. Rachel, she said softly, as if testing the taste of my name on her tongue. You look thinner. Stress does that? I replied, voice steady. She nodded and turned toward the CPS officer, a young man named Jordan with a notebook and a government-issued calmness. He gestured gently. When you're ready, Mrs. North. She took a breath. I was asked to submit a statement in support of Barbara Peterson's custody claim. And did you? He asked. Yes, I did. Last week, she said. But I'd like to amend it. Jordan blinked. On what grounds? Her voice cracked. Because Barbara told me to say things I don't believe. There was a pause so heavy it felt like the air itself stopped circulating. She told me Rachel had always been erratic. That she lashed out, that she couldn't be trusted around children. I've known Rachel since she was 10. I've seen her raise Gracie with more patience than I ever had raising my own. She looked at me then, a shimmer of regret in her eyes. And I didn't speak up. I thought I was helping. I thought maybe Barbara was right. Nina finally stepped forward. Mrs. North, to be clear, did Barbara explicitly instruct you to make negative statements about Rachel's fitness as a guardian? She said, we need the story to align. That was her phrase. And then she handed me a bullet point list. It had things like emotional volatility, employment gaps, and history of family conflict. She said all of it would sound more credible coming from someone outside the family. My fingers curled around the armrest of the chair nails, digging in slightly. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The silence felt sacred, like if I broke it, the spell might vanish. Jordan was scribbling furiously. Were any of those claims your personal observations? No, I knew Rachel left her job, but I never thought it was because she was unstable. And I certainly never saw anything to suggest she's unfit. Nina's voice was sharp, controlled. Do you understand that giving false testimony can affect both custody proceedings and your own legal liability? I do. Mrs. North nodded. And that's why I'm telling the truth now. Jordan leaned back slightly. Why the change of heart? There it was, the question that cracked open the real story. Mrs. North looked straight at me. Because I heard what Barbara said to you. At the garden. I wasn't supposed to overhear it, but I did. I was inside picking up teacups and the window was open. She said you were broken, that no one would believe you over her. And I realized she wasn't protecting the twins. She was protecting her version of the world. I could barely breathe. She's not trying to keep them safe, Mrs. North added, voice trembling now. She's trying to erase everything she couldn't control, just like she did to your father. Nina's eyes flicked toward me. I held her gaze. Still, I said nothing. She's trying to protect herself, Mrs. North finished, and I won't help her do it anymore. The room fell into a kind of weightless quiet. Then Jordan stood. Thank you. This will be submitted to the board. Mrs. North got up slowly. Before she left, she turned toward me one last time. I'm sorry, Rachel, for not seeing it sooner. I nodded, lips pressed together. The apology wasn't enough, but it was real. And for now that counted. Outside, as the door clicked shut behind her, Nina exhaled. She just poked a hole in the ship, she whispered. Now all we have to do is wait for the water. You can't defeat someone like my mother by being louder. You defeat her by being undeniable. The house was still. Not quiet in the way that invited rest, but in the way that dared you to remember. Gracie was spending the weekend with Ethan's family in Maine, her laughter temporarily replaced by the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the hallway clock. I sat alone in the dining room, papers fanned out like a trial exhibit, old memories cross-examining me. On the table sat a locked drawer I hadn't opened in almost 2 years. I'd labeled it retired, not erased, the day I stepped down from the bench. It held more than just documents, it held pieces of who I used to be before I let my mother's voice take root in the cracks of my confidence. I inserted the key. Inside, transcripts from past cases, letters of commendation, peer reviews, and a worn legal pad filled with handwritten rulings. I used to write them in longhand before typing them. Something about the motion helped me think clearly. Page after page told a different story than the one Barbara had filed in her affidavit. She said I was erratic. These records showed I was thorough. She said I was emotionally volatile. These memos reflected balance, logic, control. I spread everything across the table and began building a timeline, not just of my career, but of my stability. After several hours, I called Nina. You're doing it, she said the moment I outlined my plan. You're flipping the narrative. I'm just reminding them I'm more than someone's daughter, I said. I used to be someone's judge. You still are. You're just off the bench. I might need to step back on it. For this one fight, we coordinated next steps, names of professionals who could conduct a neutral psychological assessment, proof of Gracie's positive development under my care, and a petition to the Judicial Review Board to temporarily unseal my record for transparency. After we hung up, I took a deep breath and began drafting a formal statement to accompany my request to the court. Not a plea, a declaration. It wasn't easy. I wrote about my resignation not as a breakdown, but as a deliberate choice made under personal strain. I explained that stepping back was a responsible act, not an admission of instability. I referenced the families I'd served, the children I'd protected. I even cited 2 specific rulings where my judgments were later upheld on appeal, quiet confirmations of my sound mind. When I finished, I printed the letter on thick paper, the kind that feels like it's supposed to last. At the top, in crisp font, Rachel Whitmore, former family court judge. Personal statement. I slid it into an envelope, sealed it, and stared at it for a long time. It didn't feel like a weapon. It felt like armor. In the quiet afterward, I sent one last email to Tessa Lynn. Attached was the updated family dossier, medical evaluations, and a copy of the letter I'd written to the court. I kept my note to her short. If Barbara plans to question my fitness, I'd like her to meet the woman who used to decide the fate of families like hers. There was a strange comfort in that. For months, I'd been reacting, parrying my mother's carefully orchestrated attacks, dodging emotional landmines buried in childhood memories. But now, I wasn't just standing my ground. I was choosing the ground. And when I heard the mailbox click shut behind me, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Like maybe I was reclaiming the voice she tried to bury. Barbara receives a legal notice: you are being summoned to full trial on August 1st. The courtroom smelled like coffee sweat, and secrets waiting to be dragged into the light. Westbridge Family Court hadn't changed in the years since I left it. The sterile walls were still the color of resignation. The clock above the judge's bench still ticked half a second too fast, and the whisper of nervous bodies waiting to be called was as familiar as breath. What was new? The press. Lining the hallway with two polished microphones and practiced curiosity. And Barbara's heels. A sharp, steady rhythm on polished tile, announcing herself like royalty, entering a stage she'd claimed long before she arrived. Nina sat beside me, flipping calmly through her notes. "They're going to come for your identity first," she whispered without looking up. "Then they'll try to indict your silence." I nodded, keeping my eyes on the door as Barbara entered with Richard Harlow at her side. Her face was neutral, but there was a tremor in her mouth that told me this wasn't just about custody. This was about control, image, power. The bailiff called the session to order. Case 412D, Peterson v. Whitmore, motion for full custodial reassignment. Chief Justice Dana Caldwell took her seat, her expression unreadable. I'd sat with her on panels, voted on procedural reforms, shared lukewarm coffee and dry deliberations in back rooms. She was sharp, fair, and famously intolerant of theatrics. I prayed, she remembered. Opening statements, she asked. Richard stood smooth as oil. "Your Honor, today will present compelling evidence that Ms. Rachel Whitmore is unfit to provide long-term stability for minor dependents. Her history reveals erratic employment, emotional volatility, and concerning gaps in maternal involvement. In contrast, Ms. Barbara Peterson, maternal grandmother to the minors, offers a track record of nurturing stability, volunteerism, and structured care." I stared straight ahead. Nina had warned me not to flinch. "She's going to keep it sanitized," Nina whispered. But wait. Her real move's coming. Barbara took the stand. She wore a pale lavender suit, understated pearls, the portrait of calm. Ms. Peterson, Richard began. "How would you describe your daughter's consistency in raising her own child?" Barbara sighed almost apologetically. "Rachel means well, but she disappears. Emotionally, physically. She spirals under stress. Gracie is often left in the care of partners or friends. There's no routine, no predictability. And in terms of employment, she's unstable. She's left jobs without explanation. She hasn't worked a full year consecutively since, at least 4 years ago." Nina tensed beside me. I kept my pen moving. Barbara tilted her head. "She can barely hold a job." Gracie raises herself. The words hit harder than I'd expected, even though I'd prepared for them. There was a pause. Then a shift. Justice Caldwell leaned forward. "Ms. Peterson, are you aware that Rachel Whitmore served 6 years on this bench?" Silence dropped like a gavel. Richard's eyes flicked toward Barbara, who blinked once, frozen. Justice Caldwell continued, her tone surgical. "That she presided over 300 family court cases, wrote 22 published opinions, and maintained an unblemished judicial record until voluntarily stepping down. Barbara's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Richard cleared his throat. "We don't dispute Ms. Whitmore's previous credentials, Your Honor, but you omitted them," Caldwell interrupted. "You framed the narrative to suggest instability without context. That's not oversight. That's strategy. I don't like strategy that insults the court's memory." Nina leaned closer to me. "There it is." I said nothing, just pressed my pen to paper and wrote one word in all caps: undeniable. The courtroom falls into stunned silence. Richard Harlow's face drains of color. My mother built a fortress of reputation, but one well-placed truth cracked every polished stone. The courtroom was warmer than the day before. Maybe it was the sun filtering through the long glass windows, or maybe it was the way people looked at me differently now, less like a defendant, more like a person returning to her own name. I sat straighter at the table, not in defiance, in ownership. Nina stood and walked toward the judge's bench, a leather-bound folder in her hand. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "today, we submit the full judicial record of Rachel Whitmore. 6 years of service performance evaluations, peer reviews, and relevant family case history. These documents are not for defense, they are for clarity." She handed them to the clerk, who passed them to Chief Justice Caldwell. As the documents were opened, someone in the back of the courtroom let out a soft, "Oh." A ripple of quiet reaction moved through the public benches. I saw a woman I didn't know nod. Another man, perhaps from CPS, glanced toward me with a trace of apology. For a moment, reputation wasn't theory, it was fact. Caldwell flipped through the pages slowly. "The court acknowledges receipt," she said, eyes scanning each line. "This will be entered into record in full." Barbara shifted in her seat. I didn't look at her. Tessa Lynn took the witness stand next. Ms. Lynn, Nina began. "Can you describe what you observed during your home visit to Ms. Peterson's residence?" Tessa adjusted her glasses. The household was visually ideal, but several behavioral cues in the children suggested rehearsed responses. When I attempted to deviate from Barbara's expected line of questioning, both children hesitated or glanced toward her, particularly Noah. And were there concerns that merited further investigation? Yes. Enough to trigger a secondary interview off-site. Nina nodded, then clicked a small remote. The court speaker system buzzed softly. A familiar voice filled the room. Barbara's voice. "If she asks about the pills again, say it's vitamins." The words echoed against the wood-paneled walls. The courtroom held its breath. Tessa spoke again. "That recording was captured legally with Rachel Whitmore present as a secondary observer. It strongly suggests coaching behavior. The silence that followed wasn't confusion, it was processing. Reframing. Rebuilding the image of Barbara Peterson not as matriarch, but as manipulator." And still I did not gloat. I stood. Caldwell gave a nod, allowing me to approach the stand. "I'm not here to destroy my mother," I said, voice steady. "I'm here to reclaim the truth." I pulled a small piece of paper from my folder and unfolded it. "This is from a letter my father wrote years before he passed. I'm not submitting it as legal evidence. I'm reading it for me." I paused. "To the daughters I failed to protect. You weren't broken. You were never broken. Your mother made you feel small so she could feel bigger. I'm sorry I watched it happen. I'm sorry I told you to survive her instead of stopping her." I folded the letter again. I didn't cry. I didn't look at Barbara. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want the story to stop rewriting itself. And this today is what honesty looks like when it stops hiding." Barbara stood so fast her chair screeched. "This is a vendetta," she snapped, eyes wild. "She's embarrassing this family." "No," I said, still calm. "You did that the moment you turned love into leverage." Caldwell's gavel struck once. Enough, she said. We will take a 15-minute recess. Richard Harlow moved to speak, but Caldwell raised a hand. Mr. Harlow, my chambers. Now. He froze. You're no longer in control of this. Chief Justice Caldwell orders a recess and calls Richard into chambers. You're no longer in control of this. The strongest people don't always win. But the ones who lie too long, they always fall the hardest. The third day in court didn't begin with noise. It began with whispers. Not about me. About her. I arrived earlier than usual, not by plan, just the result of another sleepless night. The courthouse cafeteria was nearly empty. The coffee burned on the way down. I didn't notice. What I did notice was Barbara standing in the hallway outside the courtroom alone. No polished entourage, no arm-linking cousins or nodding church ladies. Just her in a blazer that suddenly looked a size too big, her posture not quite as regal. She was scrolling through her phone, then stopped, maybe realizing the messages weren't coming in. Nina leaned toward me as we entered the courtroom. People are distancing themselves. You feel that I see it? I said. Mrs. Lillian North was called back to the stand. Her heels clicked more hesitantly than they had on day one. Her voice trembled not out of weakness, but maybe out of guilt. I need to correct my previous testimony, she said, folding her hands neatly. I was misled by a long-standing friendship. I was told things about Rachel that I did not personally witness, but repeated out of trust. She turned slightly not toward me, but away from Barbara. I now believe Rachel has been more wronged than wrong. Barbara didn't blink. The words didn't shatter the courtroom, but they punctured the atmosphere like someone finally opened a window. Melanie's name came up again casually during Nina's redirect. Do you know where Melanie is now? She asked Mrs. North. No, she answered. I haven't seen her in weeks. Last I heard she was struggling. I wish I had known more. I sat still, but that sentence hollowed something out inside me. Melanie's absence was no longer a subplot. It was a silence that now had weight. Richard rose next, slower than usual. His voice lacked the courtroom swagger he usually wrapped his questions in. I could see him scanning through mental strategies, coming up empty. At recess, he approached Nina with a different look. Something closer to a shrug than a smirk. If we move to settle privately, withdraw the petition, agree on shared visitation, would your client consider? Nina smiled politely. We're past the point of silence. She turned back to me and didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The afternoon session was quieter. Barbara was called again. She walked to the stand without a glance in my direction. She sat, folded her hands as she always did, but something in her face had changed. There was no armor left. I want to clarify my position, she said, not looking at the judge. I didn't trust Rachel with the children because she reminds me too much of myself. That was the truth. Or part of it. Not an apology. Not an admission of guilt. But a fracture in her monolith finally voiced out loud. Control, she continued, almost whispering now, was the only way I knew to feel safe. There was no audible gasp, no slam of the gavel. Just the shared realization, as if the whole courtroom exhaled at once, that this woman, this relentless curator of narrative, was finally off script, and she didn't know what to do without it. Chief Justice Caldwell stared at her a long moment, then nodded once. There's a private request on record. Ms. Whitmore, are you willing to meet with your mother briefly without counsel? Nina leaned toward me. You don't have to. I know. I won't go far, she added softer. I stood. Barbara was already waiting in the side conference room, arms crossed, eyes on the window that overlooked the back parking lot. Her reflection looked smaller than I remembered. She didn't speak first. Neither did I. After a long pause, she finally said, This didn't go the way I thought it would. I nodded once. No, it didn't. I thought I was protecting them. The twins. You were protecting yourself. That landed. Not sharply. Just truthfully. She didn't argue. After a beat, she turned to face me. I was hard on you. All your life. I know. You still showed up. I did. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not offering it. She nodded once, maybe in relief, maybe in defeat. But for the first time in years, we looked at each other without an audience, and I think we both realized there was no winner here. Just one woman who unraveled and one who refused to break. Chief Justice allows it. A guarded conversation is granted. Winning isn't the same as healing, and justice doesn't always clap when it enters the room. The house was too quiet that morning. Not because it was empty, but because we were all still learning how to make noise together. Gracie was in the kitchen carefully slicing strawberries with the seriousness of a surgeon. Sophie sat beside her, arms wrapped around a coloring book she hadn't touched yet. Noah, always the quieter one, was curled up on the couch with his backpack still on, as if he didn't quite trust that he wouldn't have to leave again. I let the moment breathe before walking in. They're not guests, I said gently, placing 2 extra bowls on the table. They're family. Gracie looked up at me, eyes wide but calm. She didn't say anything, but when she slid the strawberries toward Sophie without being asked, I saw the truth bloom in her silence. It had been a week since the trial ended. Barbara had moved out the same day the final ruling came in. No press conference, no dramatic exit. Just a short letter left on my doorstep in her unmistakable handwriting. I hope you know what you're doing. That was it. No apology, no reflection. Just a final attempt to frame the story even in retreat. I didn't respond. I opened the drawer in my study, the one where my father's letter lived, folded like a memory I couldn't quite bring myself to let go of, and placed hers beside it. Not as an act of sentiment, as closure. The news cycle had already moved on. A brief clip ran on the local station, a disembodied anchor's voice narrating our pain. Former Judge Rachel Whitmore granted full custodial rights to her niece and nephew after a public family court dispute. Sources say the decision reflects ongoing concerns about Barbara Peterson's influence and alleged misconduct. No charges filed. I didn't need charges. I needed peace. And I was building it, one breakfast, one quiet night, one mended bedtime routine at a time. Ethan returned that weekend. He brought chocolate muffins and fresh flowers. He hugged Gracie longer than usual. When Sophie offered him one of her drawings, an uneven house with too many windows and 4 stick figures, he took it like it was a gift from a museum. I miss this, he said later as we folded laundry in the hallway. I missed you, like this. I nodded, not needing to say more. The children were adjusting slowly. Sophie cried in her sleep some nights. Noah flinched when I raised my voice to call Gracie in from the yard. Trauma didn't leave marks you could explain, but it left clues. And I was learning to read them. Grace wasn't in winning. Grace was in not becoming the thing I fought so hard to escape. On Tuesday afternoon, Gracie asked if we could drive by the courthouse. She said she wanted to see the place where Mommy helped save us. So we did. The sun was warm. The marble steps hadn't changed, but they didn't feel as heavy now. Sophie and Noah held hands as they climbed them, curious, unsure. I stood with them, not as a judge, not as a daughter, just as Rachel. Are you a judge again? Gracie asked, tilting her head like she was genuinely considering it. I smiled. No, I said. Just a mom who finally judged herself fairly. And for the first time in a long, long while, that was enough. Gracie, are you a judge again? Rachel smiles. No, just a mom who finally judged herself fairly. The courtroom is empty now, but sometimes echoes are louder than the verdict. The bench no longer intimidated me, not because I had conquered it or stood behind it again, but because I had outgrown the need for its validation. Westbridge Family Court was closed for the day. The soft tick of the wall clock overhead was the only sound in the chamber, joined occasionally by the creak of the floor beneath my heels. Late sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting long, golden rectangles across the empty seats where lives had been judged, paused, or quietly reset. I stood beside the same table where I'd once sat, shoulders tense, truth in hand, doubt circling like a vulture. The table was just furniture now. I'd reclaimed what mattered: myself. I gathered the last of the documents, court copies, witness statements, and a few handwritten notes. Nina insisted I keep just in case. There was no press outside today. No whispers, no cameras. Just dust and quiet and peace. Chief Justice Caldwell entered from the side chamber, a folder tucked beneath her arm. Her robes were unfastened, her expression softer than I'd ever seen it. "You stayed behind," she said, not surprised. "I needed a moment," I replied, "to let it end where it began." She nodded. "I came to ask," she said, stepping closer. "There's a juvenile protection advisory board forming at the state level. They're looking for someone with judicial experience. Someone who's walked through the system, not just written policy around it." I didn't answer right away. "I'm not sure I'm ready to sit behind anything that high again," I said honestly. "You wouldn't be behind it," she said. "You'd be beside it. Different kind of power." I smiled, but I didn't commit. Not yet. We parted with a brief handshake, hers firm, mine steady. I watched her leave, the weight of her offer trailing behind her like a second shadow. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. "Nina, think about writing that piece for the Law Journal. Real reform needs faces, not just stats. Ethan, dinner's almost ready. Gracie wants to teach Sophie how to make your lasagna. God help us." I laughed softly. The kind of laugh that comes not from comedy but from unexpected grace. I finished packing the documents, placing a small folder labeled "Keep" into my satchel. Inside were the pages that mattered most: a copy of my father's letter, the CPS transcript, and a picture of Gracie holding Sophie's hand in front of our house. As I zipped it shut, my eyes caught the chair. Her chair, where Barbara had sat, flawless posture, pearl necklace tight around her neck, every word measured like legal currency. That chair, now empty, held no power, just light. I stepped toward it, not to judge, not to gloat, to forgive. "I used to wonder if you'd ever see me," I whispered, "but I don't need that anymore." I paused, pressing my hand to the back of the chair. "You never saw me, Mom?" But I did. The silence received it like an oath. I turned and walked away, past the judge's bench, past the memories, into the evening sun waiting just beyond the courthouse doors. I used to think justice had to roar to be real. Turns out it just has to last. Every single view means a meal for someone in need. Just by watching this video, you're giving warmth, hope, and a full plate to those less fortunate. So watch now, share now, subscribe to the channel, and let's spread love together.